Greetings fellow gorehounds and welcome back to another Blood Splattered vlog. So today's video is going to be a little different because this last weekend I did not go see a horror movie, instead I went and saw Marvel's Black Panther. The latest superhero movie about a guy with cool gadgets and an awesome suit kicking ass in the name of justice. And I gotta say, when it comes to Marvel movies, they usually do right by me. They usually make movies that I thoroughly enjoy, even though they are rarely my favorite movies of the year. And they've kind of become like comfort movies to me. I go and see them every year knowing full well that I'm not going to have my mind blown, but I'm going to be thoroughly entertained and I'm going to leave happy. They're basically big blockbusters done right. They're not stupid and dumbed down like the Transformers movies. And while the action in these movies rarely reach the level of like a John Wick or The Raid, I'm usually so thoroughly invested in the characters that I just don't care. I want to see them succeed and I want to see them kick ass, and usually I get that. So needless to say, going into the Black Panther, I was pretty much gearing up to have a good time. And I am happy to report not only did I have a wonderful time watching Black Panther, it is also in the top 5 best movies Marvel ever made. It's kind of crazy. It feels like Marvel pulled out all the stops when making this movie. They wanted to make sure the action was better than normal, the comedy and the humor is always spot on but never getting in the way of the emotional moments. And that's another thing, the emotional moments in this movie are some of the most heart-wrenching ones in any Marvel movie. In fact, the only Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff that reaches the levels of heart-wrenching in this movie is probably the Netflix shows. And those shows take a long time to get you invested in the characters before pulling your heart out. Whereas this movie only had 2 hours and it did a damn good job of making you care about everyone. And I'm not even just talking about Black Panther, I'm talking about his entire family. His mom, his sister, his best friend, his surrogate uncle. You care about all these characters, and when bad things happen to them, you are hoping so hard that they're gonna make it through it. And that's another thing, this is a movie that's not afraid to kill off a character, so you might get invested in someone only to see them killed right before your eyes. Now obviously I'm not going to tell you which characters are going to bite the big one because this is the spoiler-free section after all, but be forewarned, this movie is going to thoroughly pull your heartstrings. And when it comes to the action in this movie, I actually felt like this was some of the best directed action in any of the Marvel movies. With the single exception probably being the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, the action in those movies is very well directed. But I was pleasantly shocked because I was actually worried after watching the trailers that they were going to do that thing that Spider-Man Homecoming did, where a lot of the action that takes place at night is going to be really hard to follow because everything is just a bit too dark. Except that it's not just that it's too dark, it's also that you're cutting real fast between a bunch of things. And you combine that with like strobing lights of like sparks and fire and explosions, it's just really hard to see. Now granted, when it comes to Spider-Man Homecoming, I didn't have that same problem when I saw it on home video as I did in the theaters, but I still remember sitting there watching Spider-Man Homecoming the first time and going like, oh man, this is a really awesome movie. I just wish the action was a little better. And I feel like this movie delivers on the kind of action that I wanted from Spider-Man Homecoming in spades. Because even though this character is wearing an even darker suit and often is fighting at night because that's the whole purpose of his dark suit, to blend in with the shadows, I never once in this entire movie got lost as to where he was in any given scene. I always knew where he was in the scene and what he was doing and who he was doing it to and just how fucking badass 90% of the shit he does in this movie is. There's a whole scene where he fights a rhino and I'm just gonna leave it at that. It's pretty badass. The other thing I really liked about this movie is I felt like this had a really strong villain, but I don't want to dive too deep into that because I don't remember if the trailers actually revealed who like the main villain truly is in this movie. It kind of showed a scattershot of various characters who could be the main villain and are obviously villains, but as to who ends up in the life or death struggle with Black Panther in the final act of this movie, I am not going to spoil that. Which I think we're actually coming up on the spoilers soon because I'm not sure what else to talk about before we get there. The movie's funny, it's action-packed, and given the nature of this particular hero and the world he encompasses, this movie thoroughly jumps from being like a James Bond espionage thriller to like a flat-out Star Wars-esque space battle, among many other awesome genres that this movie tackles. And it does this effortlessly from start to finish. You're never lost, you're never sitting there going like, hey, wait a minute, how did we get here? And you're always thoroughly on board with every single plot turn this movie makes. Now granted, there are aspects of this movie that are pretty predictable, but in the same way that any superhero movie is. You know, once the bad guy is revealed, that eventually the hero is going to have to fight him in the final act and save the day and save the world. But I suppose if that kind of predictability bothers you, then you probably shouldn't be watching Marvel movies to begin with. In fact, you should probably skip out on most superhero movies. Anyway, my fellow Gorehounds, I give Black Panther 2 thumbs up. It is thoroughly entertaining. I loved it from start to finish. And with that all said, my fellow Gorehounds, I'll include some sort of Amazon affiliate link in the description below. And if you click that link and buy something through that link, then I will get a kickback from it. And with that all said, let us finally move on to the spoilers. Alrighty then, so the beginning of this movie kind of takes a cue from Iron Man 3 in that it starts in the 90s. More specifically, it starts off in Oakland, California in the 90s. And I gotta say, as a resident of the San Francisco Bay Area who happened to be seeing this within the vicinity of Oakland, that was pretty awesome to see on the screen. The moment the title card popped up, my entire theater just erupted in applause. It was just a wonderful communal moment. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. The point is, the movie opens up in Oakland in the 90s, where we witness a scene in which a younger version of Black Panther's father, who some of you may recall dies in Captain America's Civil War, which was the moment that springs Black Panther into action and turns him into a worldwide superhero as opposed to someone who just stays within his own country. But in this opening scene, a younger version of his father ends up catching his brother, in other words, the Black Panther's uncle, and he catches him in the middle of committing treason against Wakanda. Which, for those of you who know nothing about Black Panther, he comes from a country called Wakanda, which is way more highly advanced than any country on the planet. But the entire country has a secret identity of its own, because it uses cloaking technology to make it look like it's just a country of poor farmers. And in many ways, this movie is kind of like the origin story of the Wakandan superhero. And by that I don't mean Black Panther, I mean the country itself. But the treason he's committing is not the kind you would expect, it's actually something very noble. Because basically, Black Panther's father and his uncle have a socio-political difference. His father believes in isolationism, that Wakanda needs to stay where it is and keep its technology to itself, because he finds that the rest of the world is in a constant state of conflict and war, and if they were to share their technology with the rest of the world, it would cause even worse wars. And even more than that, if everyone else has Wakandan technology, then Wakanda would be caught in the middle of that war. And Black Panther's father believes in peace, not war. Now on the flip side, Black Panther's uncle has been living out in the outside world. So he's seen the way other black people have been treated by the rest of the world. He is even more aware than Black Panther's father of the history of slavery, of poverty, of the high death rates, of the complete massacres happening in various countries in Africa. And he believes the only way to save the rest of the world is to arm the poor black folk. And more specifically, arm them with Wakandan technology. Basically, you have like this conflict between the kind of Martin Luther King-esque figure of his father and his uncle, who's a little more Malcolm X, who's a little more race-war-y. And personally, I thought it was really cool that this silly popcorn action movie was actually asking all these serious, deep questions. But because his uncle actually committed treason and this resulted in the deaths of many Wakandans, Black Panther's father ends up ultimately killing his own brother. And this is the event that sets off the entire story. We flash forward to the present, which takes place almost immediately after Captain America's Civil War, which means our main character, Black Panther, is returning home to Wakanda in order to claim his throne. Because his dad just died and the throne's in disarray, so someone needs to lead. But before he does this, there's one important thing he wants to do first, and that's go meet his ex-girlfriend, who it turns out is actually acting as a spy in another conflict in another country. So he goes and blows her cover and pulls her out, so that she can attend his crowning ceremony. And this sets up the whole relationship between these two characters for the rest of the movie. She's his ex-girlfriend, he still loves her, he wants her to be his queen, but she likes being a spy and feels like she could do better for the world by being out there helping people. And it's very obvious that she finds the queenly role to be very limiting. And on top of that, she's his ex-girlfriend for a reason. They had a lot of disagreements. And I was really invested in the relationship of these two characters throughout the entire movie. I just wanted to see them get together. And what can I say? It's a predictable summer blockbuster romance, but I like it. Okay, I just fucking like it, and I got no excuse for it. I just like this shit. What do you want from me? Goddamn, like, I realize if I go at this pace, it's gonna take forever to get through the plot of this movie. So I think for the sake of all of you and for the sake of my own voice, I'm gonna try to keep this short. So long story short, he goes to attend his crowning ceremony in which he fights Manape. They don't call him that in this movie, but that's who the character is. Which, for those of you who don't know, Manape is one of the reoccurring villains of Black Panther in the comics. He's the guy who's always vying for Black Panther's throne, so it was really cool to see him in this movie. But what's actually really surprising is that he actually turns out to not be a bad guy in this movie. Sure, he challenges his throne at the beginning of the movie, but over the course of the movie, he becomes his ally. And he becomes one of his strongest allies too, because he's a badass. My only complaint was I really wanted to see him go like full gorilla at one point, but I understand why they didn't do that. I get it. I get it. The last thing a movie about a black superhero needs is a comparison between black people and apes. Anyway, so after he is crowned king, that's when the real plot starts to kick off. Because Andy Serkis' character, who some of you may recall was introduced in Age of Ultron, well, it turns out his character is Claw, a known poacher / arms dealer from the comics. And in this movie, he is the character who Black Panther's uncle sold his arms to. But in the present, he's working with a new partner, and the question is, who is this guy? Because his new partner is a younger dude, but he's wearing one of those Wakandan rings around his neck. And he's played by Michael B. Jordan, who some of you may remember from that really crappy Fantastic Four remake. And believe me, he's way better off in this movie because he's one of my favorite characters in the whole movie. Because it turns out he's playing a supervillain from the comics named Killmonger. Except in this version of the story, Killmonger is actually his uncle's son. So basically in the movie, Killmonger is Black Panther's cousin, which means he has every right to vie for Black Panther's throne. And that's what this movie ultimately is about. It's actually a battle of kings and princes. In other words, it's a Game of Thrones. You see what I did there? You see? You get it? Game of Thrones? Yeah, I'm a fucking idiot. He's seen the world at its very worst. He grew up in Oakland and committed crimes and was in gangs. Then he joined the military and became one of its top assassins. He's marked up his entire body with every single person he's ever killed, which is why he earned the name Killmonger in the military. And he is just full of hate and resentment and anger. And why shouldn't he be? He was basically abandoned by his uncle. Black Panther's father could have taken him back home, but he didn't. Because there's a part of Black Panther's father who saw him as a blight. Because he wasn't a full-blooded Wakandan, he's half Wakandan. So even though he's got royal blood in his veins, he's seen as an outsider. And Black Panther's father did not want an outsider to threaten his throne. And I just fucking love the complexity of all these characters and just how some good characters did awful things. And how those awful things set off a series of events that created a true monster. Killmonger is one of the greatest villains in the history of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I was just so thoroughly invested in him. In fact, at points I was even more invested in him than Black Panther, which is saying a lot because I was thoroughly invested in Black Panther. Anyway, the last thing I want to say about this movie is that the other character I really loved is Black Panther's sister. She's basically this movie's Q and develops all of Black Panther's technology. But on top of that, she's also a princess, which I guess makes her the most awesome Disney princess ever. Because she's a Disney princess that builds awesome technology for a superhero. And then later kind of becomes a bit of a superhero herself. Just God, this movie is fantastic. I highly recommend it, and I'm going to stop making a fool of myself right here. So as per usual, my fellow Gorehounds, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so that you're notified of my videos immediately upon their upload. And as always, peace out, and I'll catch y'all later. Hopefully with a horror movie next time.